All right. So, what I propose here, it sounds a little strong, but empathy has been weaponized and has been turned into a weapon of mass destruction. So, first, we have to talk about what is empathy, right? And I'm going to just go through a combination of definitions here, basically. But the general consensus is empathy is the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. Now, there's some gaps in that one, right? Now, let's start with, first of all, the ability to empathize with someone, right? So go back to episode 3. I talk about a sound heart. And I talk about a sound heart, and there was this portion of that episode that essentially discusses the idea of emotional intelligence. And the thing is, empathy requires emotional intelligence. So if you're lower on the emotional intelligence scale, meaning you can't name or identify the feelings that you are feeling, then you're going to find it very hard to empathize with somebody else who's feeling a range of emotions as well, right? And or your compass for what they would potentially feel in that situation is going to be slightly off. For instance, if you can only feel, and this is a very base example, but if you can only feel happiness and sadness and you can't name or label any other emotion, you couldn't necessarily empathize with the person who is angry. You couldn't put yourself in that person's shoes and think what they would think and experience what they would experience in that case, because you don't know how to identify anger. So there's the first gap right there. But that's just in general. So let's just say everybody is very empathetic and they know, we have this understanding basically, right? And let me pull back just a little bit, so that I can explain where did this come from, right? And I'm not going to go into extreme detail at this part, but it's like this came from a conversation I was having with one of my clients. And I just simply asked the question, he was going through the situation with me and everything like that, and we were talking about it, and I just asked, why is it that we are, in general, in America at least, called on as a society to have empathy for marginalized groups, yet that same empathy would not be given to the Christian? As a subset to that, furthermore, why is it looked at, why are Christians looked at as typically non-empathetic, right? It seems like a lot of people believe that Christians don't have empathy, even though Christians are called on to have empathy. Go to Romans 12:15, right? I can even hold. So Romans 12:15 basically says, rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. Why would you do that? Essentially is telling you to be empathetic. So I might be missing something in a sense that why would Christians typically be seen as non-empathetic? But even furthermore, why does it seem like we should have empathy for everybody else but the Christian? So it's almost like we're on a one-way street here, and it's not, and it's not equal or balanced. So where do I say that it's being used as a weapon of mass destruction? Right, that's a little strong, but we've been kind of trained to think a particular way. It was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna put myself in the shoes of this person whose life I've never experienced, and then try and imagine how they would feel about it. Sounds kind of like a setup to me. And I'm not saying empathy is bad. Obviously, we're supposed to, as a Christian, you're supposed to have empathy, right? So, but where does it go wrong, right? And so, in a general sense, empathy So for the person who's having empathy for the other, they can easily use that to manipulate others, right? And that's where empathy goes wrong. It's in manipulation, right? The person who's empathetic or the empath, they can use the empathy to manipulate others in a way that is just like, hey, look, I feel for this group and I'm gonna be one for the cause for this group. I'm gonna line myself up with this group because I feel so badly for them or whatever. And I'm gonna act like I'm helping them out when I'm really taking advantage of them. I'm not gonna dig any more into that. But then there's the other side of empathy where the non-empath uses empathy to gain an advantage over empaths. Whereas it's like, hey, listen, don't you see? I'm in a poor, lowly state. Don't you feel that? Don't you feel for me? Now help me. Oh, it'd be great if you could help me out with this because I was just... Basically, they use other people's empathy for self-gain, right? So it's just like, it's a pity me thing, right? Pity me, woe is me, now help me. And people fall for that all the time, right? It's just like, you know, there have been scams based on that alone to take advantage of your empathy for decades, probably even more than that, hundreds of years, I'm sure, right? That's one way where the it's used for self-gain for the non-empath. And I think I'm going to leave that one there too, because both of those versions of empathy are corrupt and not at all what it's supposed to be. See, in a lot of cases, that empathy is separate from compassion. Empathy without compassion is corrupted empathy. The next way that empathy, and this is from a Christian perspective, the next way that empathy is used in a corrupt manner is if it's purely an emotional response without being actually coupled with truth. So you feel everything that that person is going through, but it's actually enabling a particular sin, or it's enabling a typical type of corruption. And that's where empathy's often been weaponized, where it's just like you feel for this particular person or this particular group, and that feeling and that empathy that you have for that person kind of causes you to overlook all of the bad stuff because they're in such a bad position, a low position, and you feel for them. They can basically do no wrong. And that's where it's also been corrupt. I'm not naming any names or anything like that, but just look around, you see it everywhere you go. And then another way, or the last way I have, at least for you on this one, that empathy has become corrupted is when you have the emotional response and it's not coupled with rationality. Okay? So the example I just gave you before was where you have the emotional response and it's not coupled with truth, right? So then, therefore, it enables sin. This one is, it's not coupled, empathy, you have the emotional response and it's not coupled with rationality, and therefore it causes terrible decision making. And it's a short-term, the idea is more like a short-term fix in favoring the short-term over longevity. It's like taking medicine, and you don't want your like, I have two boys, again, you don't, like, one of my boys gets sick and they have to get a shot or something like that. That shot is painful. Me feeling for them would basically say like, nah, man, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt them. So no, don't do it. That's me having empathy for them, but is also kind of corrupted in a sense that he needs that medicine to get better, but he's not going to do it because, right? So you're favoring the short term over the long term. And you have to consider these things when you're looking So when somebody tells you you should have empathy or you should be more empathetic, well, these are the ways and these are the things that you maybe would consider, just so that you're actually properly empathetic and not being taken advantage of. And I guess the last way, or another way, or last way, there's plenty of ways, but this one kind of just pops into my head a little bit, where you basically make empathy your idol. So you become, like in this instance, you become so conditioned with feeling what other people feel, or feeling what you think other people feel, that you've built up this separate world around yourself, and you treat that as your God. So then that overtakes, and again, it's an emotional response, and that overtakes the truth of God. And you see a lot of Christians do the same thing. I could name very, very specific groups. I think I don't want to go down that road quite yet. So all I'm saying for this segment is just keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open, head on a swivel, and understand and recognize when potentially you're being taken advantage of because of your empathy.